real-world issues and inspiring research to have real-world impact. We're protecting the cybersecurity of billions of internet users. We're at the forefront of conflict resolution, making a difference to the lives of children, families, and communities across the world. We're working with industry to develop new technologies. We're creating access to safe, nutritious food for a growing population. And we're at the forefront of major medical breakthroughs, making a real impact on people's lives. We give amazing minds a place to do amazing things in a university fit for the 21st century. We are the heartbeat of one of Europe's fastest growing cities, in a country where the hospitality, welcome and warmth of our people is legendary. Queen's impact economically can't be underestimated either. Every year we play our part, making a multi-billion-pound contribution to the UK economy. While our research is estimated to have an annual impact of over £3 billion. And evidence shows that for every £1 invested in Queen's, over £8 is generated for the economy. Together, we are shaping a better world.
Guests, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back to the stage your host, Bill Neely.
Thank you very much. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you have all been re-energized by the food, the fresh air, and what we call in Northern Ireland a bit of crack. And for our overseas visitors, that has nothing to do with drugs and everything to do with friendship. Right. We are kicking off this afternoon with two people from a quite extraordinary city. Manchester has always been a city of revolutionary change. It was the world's first industrial city, the cockpit of the Industrial Revolution. And today, partly guided by our guest speakers, it is undergoing even more revolutionary change. One of them is a man I've admired actually for many years. He is probably, certainly in my view, outside London, the most influential and respected mayor in the UK. First elected as mayor of Greater Manchester in 2017 and re-elected 4 years later. Before that, he was in government in Gordon Brown's cabinet for 3 years in 3 very different jobs. And with Andy, our other guest is originally from Belfast but moved to Manchester 21 years ago, and she is now the leader of Manchester City Council, which she's led for 3 years. She is also the city's first female and LGBT leader, although she says she wishes for the day when that kind of introduction is irrelevant, and I'm with her on that. So here to talk us through Manchester's amazing journey, how it's been achieved, and what remains to be done, please welcome Andy Burnham and Bev Craig.
Good afternoon, everyone, and what a pleasure to be here. Always good after the lunchtime slot to see people back in the room, and hopefully we're going to have a really exciting session for you. I think the city of Manchester is one in many ways that needs no introduction, but I want to talk to you a little bit around our journey of change that we've seen over the last 15 to 20 years. A city that shares its stories with many other cities across the world that have adjusted and struggled at times in the post-industrial world, when cities that had prided themselves in industry, and be it what you see here in a city like Belfast, with the docks and the linen industry, or the textile industry in Manchester, cities that have fought to forge their new future, what the new economy looks like that can take places into decades to come of future prosperity. Manchester as a city has been a fast-changing one, A city that's witnessed population growth through both high birth rates of our own residents, keeping residents as they grow and they thrive, and attracting world-class talent from across the globe. We've seen a city transformed from a city that people would leave in search of new opportunity elsewhere to a city where people stay, make it their home, and do well and prosper. We now boast one of the fastest growing economies, not just in the UK, but as a city across Europe, an economy whose growth has outstripped our competitors and sits above the national average. A city that's seen growth in significant sectors, from our globally significant life sciences and biotech sectors, through to our advanced materials and manufacturing industries that add over 8 billion GVA each year, through to what we've done with our creative industries, the second largest creative economy in Europe outside of London, or the exciting moves that we're seeing in our well-known digital and tech sectors with the growth of cyber, AI, and gaming, to name a few. So we've seen a city that's witnessed both its reputational transformation and its economic one. And we've set our path to do that, I think based on 5 key principles. And I want to just set you a little bit of those out this afternoon. We've never been shy when it comes to ambition and the ability to reimagine what a post-industrial city should and could look like. Many people over many years have told places like Manchester that we've had our day, that actually we've lived and contributed to history, but we've consistently argued that the best is yet to come. We've done that through energy and ambition and grabbing onto moments and opportunities as we've spotted them, but not losing sight of the prize. We've recognised as a second component those ingredients of place. So I wouldn't be able to boast to you that Manchester consistently performs highly now in The Economist's Global Cities Index of Livability, or that we continue to be one of the best places to visit for culture, for art, or for business, if we didn't recognise the building blocks that sit behind what a good place means. Investing in culture, a forward look and regeneration, the ability to bring together your skills and talent pipelines, but recognising that people want good and exciting and thriving places to live. The third area for me has been the intentional diversification of our economy. So I intentionally give a picture of the different areas of industry that are doing well, because it's been a forward look that set out that actually we need all of these components of our economy to thrive, because that's what makes us the hotbed of innovation. Bringing together different sectors into a coherent ecosystem that supports innovation, that leans in closely to our research institutions, has never been more important. The fourth, though, is around purposeful growth. Manchester historically has been an incredibly poor city, a city that's never had its opportunity of wealth and prosperity, both social and economic, and a city that deserves its chance. So linking all of our ambitions around growing our economy into jobs, into opportunities, and demonstrable benefits for the people that live there has been fundamental. And then the final thing for me has been around partnerships. It's been about the relationship that we've been able to strive as a city that sets out our relationship with business, with our research and civic institutions, but also recognising that we need to forge and create new partnerships. Manchester in the 1980s was part of a cooperative group of local authorities and fellow payers that wanted to continue to work together in Greater Manchester. We recognised that the City of Manchester was at the heart of a functional economic geography that also translated into a place that people could be proud of. And it was for that very reason that we consistently argued, and at times fought, for more power and more control to be devolved from Westminster to our place. A city that now sees, even with the great devolution that we have, a country that the OECD consistently ranks as one of the most centralised in the OECD countries. So that's why it gives me great pleasure to introduce the keynote to this afternoon's session, Andy Burnham, because we fought very hard in our city and our city region for the ability to have these powers and to pull them together into one place. The ability to have a directly elected mayor that could convene and bring together all of the bits of our 3 million strong city region to be able to achieve the things that we know we need to be globally competitive and to cement our place on the global scale. We've only been able to do this through strong working relationships between city and city region. And I think it's pretty fair to say that actually Andy has consistently made waves for our city region. So I would like to welcome him to the stage today to talk a little bit more around what next in terms of the opportunities for Greater Manchester. Andy.
Thank you very much indeed, Bev. It's brilliant to be on this stage with you in your home city. You are, without doubt, the biggest talent of the next generation in local government in England, and to work with you at this moment in time in Manchester is a real privilege for me. For my part, I was born in Liverpool, so obviously, Bev born here, I was born in Liverpool. What does that say about Manchester? A very open-minded and welcoming place is what it says. That they're certainly, given that they've got somebody in Liverpool as their first elected mayor, but that's what makes it great. Given all the challenges we've got, it is a great place, and you're going to hear some of that pride that we both have today in the place we call home. So, let me start with this. What Manchester does today, the world does tomorrow. So said British Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli, it is claimed, when the city, Manchester, was at the peak of its industrial powers in the 19th century. Now, it sounds like an impossible boast, and I know what you're thinking. Manchester's very good at those, and we are quite good at, we don't undersell ourselves, you will have noticed. But it actually is more true than you might think. Today, when Bev and I go round the world promoting our city, we are often proudly informed by ministers, mayors, ambassadors of the names of cities considered the Manchester of Finland, the Manchester of India, or every country, it seems, has their Manchester. The second city that's the outsider to the capital, the industrial city, and many countries proudly talk of their Manchester. Indeed, next year, we will go in numbers from Greater Manchester to the Manchester of the East, Osaka, to celebrate with our friends there as they host World Expo, and with them to tell the story of the Japanese students who came in the 19th century to Manchester to make drawings of the machinery in its mills and then take those drawings back to Japan. So that was our story then, but sadly it changed, as you will know, in the second half of the 20th century as the coal which fired those mills went into decline and the cotton started to be sent elsewhere. Since then, the kind of back end of the last century, Greater Manchester has been busy laying the foundations for a new story in the first quarter of the 21st century. And I think those foundations are now laid. And I want to tell you today about what comes next. Just to say before I do, something of the philosophy upon which devolution in Greater Manchester has been based. It turns on its head the economic orthodoxy of the second half of the 20th century, particularly the late 20th century. The drive from the 1980s onwards to make everybody compete for everything and kind of make everyone bow down to the altar of competition. We believe that left us with fragmented services, sectors, and places. It might sound counterintuitive, but in the 21st century, we need to do the opposite. To be competitive, you have to be highly collaborative. For a city whose symbol is the worker bee, this feels very natural to us. Bev and I can today reveal to you our mission, and that is to make Greater Manchester the most highly networked city region in the world, with a unique new model of city-region governance, uniting all sectors, public, private, voluntary, academic, faith, in one big mission, which is to make us, in the 21st century, one of its most innovative and inclusive cities to be found anywhere in the world. First, something on where we are now. For those born after the Second World War, and I think that includes most of the audience today, Manchester became a symbol of post-industrial decline, and they're a bit grainy, but you can see on the screen Manchester of the 1990s, the place I left when I graduated from university in 1991. I had come back home to try and find a job, but there was nothing. Despite thousands of CVs, I could find a job as an unpaid reporter on the Middleton Guardian, but I couldn't make that work, obviously. So I had to do what the generation of people brought up in the 70s and 80s in the Northwest had to do. To get on in life, I had to go south. And I think Bev tells a similar story about leaving Belfast in the early 2000s. Okay, fast forward on from the Manchester of then to the Manchester of now. When people visit today, they are stunned by our skyline. And it is hard to believe that that is a real picture. It's not AI generated, but it is in fact real. And it's a credit to Bev, her colleagues at the City Council, and the organisation I lead, the Greater Manchester Combined Authority. It sends a very simple message. Greater Manchester is back, big time. New towers, new arts venues, new music arenas, and who knows, perhaps soon, a new stadium for the club of Belfast's most famous son. But that is work in progress, I might say, to the United fans in the audience, and in this city, of whom I know there are many to this very day. But we're working on it, I can assure you. As I said, today, people don't have to do what I did. In fact, we're beginning to see the reverse. In the past 3 years, 10,000 Londoners have moved to Greater Manchester. Why? Well, young 20-something and 30-something talent can find jobs in our city on a par with London, jobs that put no limit on their career ambitions or progression, and they can also find a quality of life that exceeds anything they could afford in the capital. Whereas, as Bev was saying earlier, in the 1990s, just a few hundred people lived in Manchester city centre, it is now getting close to 100,000. We have more new businesses per capita than any region outside of London. We have been the fastest growing digital and tech hub in Europe in recent times. We are growing faster than the UK economy for some time now, and that is predicted to continue. We are closing the productivity gap with London. For somebody born in the northwest of England, I can tell you for most of my life I would not have been able to say those things, but we can say those things now. So I hope you'll understand the pride. Too often we have to come on stage as Bev and I and almost say, oh, this isn't what we want quite right, and we want this to be better. Well, that's still true, of course. But I think we can lift our shoulders and our heads and say, you know what? What we are doing is working, and we've done it ourselves. They didn't do it for us down in Whitehall. We have done this ourselves. Some more of the stats, the evidence, because I want you to have the evidence in a setting like this. Greater Manchester is home, as you can see, to an £80 billion economy, which has grown by 50% since 2000. 4.5% GVA growth in 2020 alone. We've attracted the most foreign direct investment of any UK region over the past 10 years, as you again can see on the slide. And we've had more business births per head of population than any UK city outside London. We expect £750 million R&D investment each year by 2030. 183,000 new jobs by 2038. It is a dramatic turnaround, which has been 30 years in the making. And let me say, we've never lost our heart as well, though, or our conscience. We're bringing economic success, but the Manchester way is always industrial and social progress together. And that's where we've got to go now in the next period, to make sure all of our residents can feel the benefit of living in a city region like ours. People ask, what is the secret of Greater Manchester's success? And it was built by people before Bev and I, and in many ways we're building on the foundations they laid. It started with collaboration, and I come back to that word. Let's get past the pointless competition, in my view, of the 1980s. Everybody has to go in a league table if they're a school or whatever. I think we move beyond that in my view. I think we go to a more collaborative, highly networked world in the 21st century. The trouble is, around the UK, I think there's a parochial tendency for towns to fight each other, to kind of stick apart and not work together. When the UK government in the 1980s abolished collective regional structures like the Greater London Council and the Greater Manchester Council, we could have gone the same way. But instead, the 10 councils of Greater Manchester, as co-owners of our airport, they decided to stick together. And they stood apart in the rest of the country in doing so. Over time, they made the case to a London-centric system of national government that we should be allowed the chance to do more for ourselves, in the way London was given a devolution arrangement, with more powers handed to the city region. This has allowed us to pioneer our own different, bottom-up form of governance, where the power is shared. Unlike the GLA in London, which is an extra layer on top of the 30 or so councils of London, the GMCA is the councils. Bev and 9 other leaders are the members of the GMCA alongside me. And I'm not the person who says this has got to be this or that. We're 11, we're a collective, that's how we work. We're a team. I'm just the captain, let's say, of that team of 11. And the thing is, when you get a whole place approach like that, where you've got the whole system pulling together, it's the power of that approach when the political world unites with the public, the private, the voluntary, the academic, when all of that points in the same direction and pulls in the same direction, that is when something magical starts to happen. When I said we are and are going to be the most highly networked city region in the world, I meant it. The partnership between our councils has led to new layers of partnership in other sectors. We are the only city region in England to have a reform board attended by all public services at the same table, as well as our partners in the community and voluntary sector. We take a whole place approach to everything. We are the only city region where our colleges, our FE colleges, act as a single group rather than as competitors, and the same for our housing providers. We also have a voluntary sector that is highly networked, with action networks on homelessness and food security, alongside other issues like digital inclusion. And I am not aware, and please somebody correct me if I'm wrong, of any other city in the UK where our 6 universities have signed a civic partnership agreement, again, working in collaboration rather than in pointless competition, supporting each other to develop the strengths and a complementary set of strengths that then can benefit the whole of the city region. This brings me to the crucial issue of innovation. We have created Innovation GM, which is based on what we call the triple helix model of partnership between government, business and academia. What I would say to colleagues here in Belfast and anywhere looking to tread a similar path to the way we've gone, and we wish colleagues well here with the city deal, putting academia at the heart of your system, your whole approach, is critical, and actually brings academia to life, if you like, being in a living laboratory of a city region like ours, where they can shape our industrial policy, our social policy, where the people who do research can see their research being used by Bev or myself or other leaders. Devolution of power to the city region level absolutely can bring our universities into vibrant life and make the young people within them feel like they are agents of change. Who wouldn't want that? What university in the country or even in the world wouldn't want that? That's what we can offer currently in Greater Manchester, and the great thing is they do it together. They don't constantly make us choose between them by competing. They do it together, and that is such an important thing, and I know the same partnership exists here between the two big universities. And the reason why that's so important is because the places that will succeed are going to have an innovation-led economy, aren't they, in the 21st century? And that's obviously a big theme of this global innovation summit. Innovation does not happen, in my view, when organisations, people and places pointlessly, again, work in competition or in isolation. It happens when you have networks of people across businesses big and small, with universities at the centre of those networks. That's when innovation happens. It is also enhanced when places not just internally create stronger partnerships, but between different places with complementary strengths. And it's why we're really proud to be here in Belfast having conversations with the City Council and others. But we're doing the same in England. I was in Cambridge last week with a delegation from Greater Manchester to formalise the first partnership between two English devolved authorities based around R&D and innovation. Now, why does that partnership work? Cambridge, we would recognise, it is possible sometimes to recognise that somewhere might be better than Manchester. They've been doing the R pretty well, I think, for a number of centuries, the R of R&D. But they have a few planning constraints down there, and land is limited. So we can do more of the D for their R. But we actually are doing some of the R ourselves, because when I was in Cambridge last week, we went to see the Cambridge Graphene Institute. Graphene was isolated in Manchester, as you know, but their scientists are working with the team in Manchester to find out the future uses for graphene, and it was brilliant to see that level of collaboration. You see what I'm saying about highly networked, highly collaborative systems are what's going to make the difference. And places that may not normally have thought of working with each other start working with each other, and then good things happen. We've all lived in a country that has been highly centralised from a political point of view, where everything has to come from Whitehall and Westminster, where we all have to go on bended knee and bow down and beg and plead for the scraps they're prepared to throw out at us. Well, imagine if we lived in a different country, a rewired country, where power was much more evenly shared across the regions and nations, and we could all do much more for ourselves without even going through Westminster, where we could work with an empowered Belfast city region, or with an elected provost in Glasgow, or indeed an elected mayor in Dublin. Wouldn't these islands in which we live function in a much more practical way if those big places that have actually underpunched their weight because of the way they've been treated by Westminster over the years. Imagine if they were freed up to be everything that they could be, to collaborate more with each other, where we move from constantly seeing everything through a political lens and start seeing it through a place lens or a practical lens. It would feel different, wouldn't it? It would feel better. I think it would. And that's why I think we've got to work on this together to bring about the change that we need. Despite all of this and the transformation in Greater Manchester's fortunes that I've described and the arrival of new industry to replace the old, we still have a long way to go. Levels of poverty in parts of our city region, as Bev said, particularly child poverty, are amongst the highest in the UK. So there is another side to this, which we readily acknowledge. And there are still wide inequalities between the healthy life expectancy of a man in Manchester and one in the wealthiest parts of West London. What evidence is there that what we are doing is changing that grittier reality, that tougher thing that we have to change? Well, actually, it does exist. And here's a quote upon the slide, and I hope you can see it. This comes from The Lancet, October 2022. I'll just quote a little bit of what it says. Greater Manchester has shown better life expectancy than expected after devolution. The benefits of devolution have been apparent in the areas with the highest income deprivation and lowest life expectancy, suggesting a narrowing of inequalities. Improvements were likely to be due to a coordinated devolution across sectors, affecting wider determinants of health and the organisation of care services. We're proud of that because that's what I was saying to you before. Everyone facing in the same direction, everyone pulling in the same direction, that is what actually moves the dial and makes real change happen. But how many places are set up to be able to do that? We need more with that ability to do it. Just as our highly collaborative approach to devolution has improved people's health, so we now want to do the same with education. Greater Manchester is the first place in the UK to set itself the exciting mission of transforming technical education and creating an equal alternative to the university route. Here is how I describe where Greater Manchester is at right now. The kids growing up in our 10 boroughs can see the skyscrapers from their bedroom windows, but not a job to those places and to the jobs within them. Imagine the effect on aspiration of young people in our city region if we could give them that path, a realistic route to working for some of our most prestigious employers. This is another area where collaboration makes all the difference. We are connecting employers, schools and young people in a new system called the Greater Manchester Baccalaureate, or the MBAC, which will allow everyone to find a path and apply online for high-quality work placements at places like Siemens Energy or the Bank of New York, BNY Mellon. If you do something like this, you start speaking to all residents, and you move away from a sense that politics is only working for some, perhaps those on the university route. You reach into communities that have felt neglected by Westminster, that hasn't spoken to them. When you're talking about technical education and opportunities for kids who don't feel the system works for them, and then suddenly they do feel it works for them, I think that is a way in which you bring people back together who feel very alienated from politics in the dark and quite difficult times in which we live. And I do think what we're saying about city-region devolution is an answer to that. If you start on the thing that unifies people, I bet, whatever the difference is in this city, people from both communities have a pride in Belfast. They want to see it improve. And that is common ground. And it's the same in Manchester. However people vote, there is a really strong pride in Manchester, Greater Manchester, and a real strong desire to see it punch its way, to challenge London for the jobs. And that exists, I would say, in every city region. Place unifies us. Place is the one thing that we hold in common in quite a divided world, the place where we live. And if we base politics around that, rather than the things that divide us, the debates at a national level about independence and breaking away and whatever people feel about Westminster and Holyrood and Stormont and Cardiff, we kind of focus on things that divide us. We in Greater Manchester take a place first rather than a party first approach. That is about starting from a point of common ground, and then you build from there, and we believe that could bring a lot more benefit to a lot more people if the rest of the UK was enabled to work like that. So, I'm going to say in conclusion, everybody, thank you for your patience. Thank you for listening to what Bev and I have had to say. We have given the hard sell, but sometimes you do have to go up and sell yourself. The north of England wouldn't have been able to do this. 5 years ago, 10 years ago, we wouldn't have had the confidence maybe to do it, but we do now. And it's not arrogance, it's just confidence. And we should have confidence, shouldn't we? Too often people who grow up in our area get to a university and they feel imposter syndrome. They don't feel they can be confident about where we come from, but we can now. And that's such a, for me, massively empowering thing for me to be able to say to you that we do feel that now. And I hope our young people feel it too. But despite our progress, our productivity is still 35% below that of London. This is a far bigger gap than we see in between other European capitals and second cities. Think about the value we could add to the UK's global competitiveness if we could close that gap. Just narrowing it to match the difference between Paris and Lyon would add £20 billion to the UK economy if London and Manchester were as close together as Paris and Lyon. A massive prize. So we are doing well, but we have so much more to give. In July, the UK elected a new government with growth as its driving mission. We have got real growth, and we can give UK PLC so much more. But our message to our own government is a serious one. It will only happen if you give us the powers, investment, and infrastructure that we need to cope with the consequences of that growth. If we haven't got the homes to offer people moving to our city, or if our transport system becomes even more congested than it already is, then this success story may not last. You have got to invest in it and break Whitehall out of its London-centric ways. If you can't find the money for us, then empower us with new ways of raising it ourselves. And everything I've just said that I want for Manchester, I want for Belfast, I want for Liverpool, I want for Newcastle, Sheffield, Birmingham, everywhere. This week, Bev and I were at the memorial service for the person you can see on the screen, Sir Howard Bernstein. And we're not standing here claiming credit. We recognise that Sir Howard did more than anybody in this country to pioneer a new model of bottom-up devolution. As we paid our respects to Sir Howard, Bev and I, and his achievements were listed in front of us, I think we sank a little into our seats at the scale of the expectation now on our shoulders, the challenge of following in his shoes. But you know what? We are ready for it. We are making Greater Manchester the big growth success story outside of the Golden Triangle of London, Oxford, and Cambridge. It will be the most highly networked, zero-carbon city in the world by 2038, with better homes, better transport, and better jobs for our residents. We have the highest ambitions for what we can be in the 21st century and what you can be too, and we call on all investors, government and private, to back us with that vision. Thank you very much indeed for listening, everybody. Very good.
Thank you so much, Bev. Thank you so much, Andy. I said in my introduction, Manchester was a revolutionary city, and frankly, Andy sounded like a revolutionary leader there, quite inspirational, easy to see why he's been re-elected, easy to see why he's so respected. Andy said, counterintuitively, he said, to be competitive, you have to be collaborative. And that really is the theme of our third panel session, innovation. and how we can collaborate to make that happen across industries, across regions, and so on. And we are delighted to have an international panel who will give us examples from around the world of partnerships between companies, big and small, between industries and governments, and how universities fit into accelerating innovation. And you just heard Andy stress how academia has an absolutely critical role to play in what we might call the real world economy. So please, first of all, welcome your moderator, and she is the Chancellor of the University of Pittsburgh, Joan Gable, who will be joined by our global panelists, and let me introduce them as well. First of all, Dr. Michinari Hamaguchi, who is the Director General of the Center for Vaccine Research in Japan. It's known as SCARDA. It was set up by the government 2 years ago, and he's also a Director and Distinguished Fellow of the GFCC. A little closer to home, we have Margaret Harty, who's the Chief Executive of Intertrade Ireland. That's a body that helps small and medium-sized businesses on both sides of the Irish border. We have Dr. Matthew Hulver from ASU Knowledge Enterprise, ASU being Arizona State University in the United States, and he's helping drive innovation at what is one of America's fastest growing research institutions. We have from Malaysia, and thank you very much for coming, Ahmad Razif Mohammed of MITE, which stands for the Malaysian Industry Government Group for High Technology. I think I've got that right, which I hope is self-explanatory as well. And finally from Kenya, thank you also for coming, Dr. Nkem Kumba from the African Academy of Sciences, which is a non-aligned, non-political, non-profit, Pan-African organization, but in spite of all those noms, it's actually very, very effective. It's trying to transform lives through science. Welcome everyone to Belfast and to Queen's. Joan, over to you.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. So, as Bill said, my name is Joan Gable, and I serve as the Chancellor at the University of Pittsburgh, and I'm also very proud and honored to serve as the Academic Vice Chair for the Council on Competitiveness, and I'm one of the leads on the National Commission in the U.S. on Innovation and Competitiveness Frontiers, which is an innovation agenda for the states, which has many recommendations, and you may not be surprised to hear that are largely focused on partnerships and incentives in order to move that agenda forward. The University of Pittsburgh is also a very proud member of the GFCC, and we are very pleased to be here at Queen's and to be with all of you at this very important gathering. And we have a wonderful conversation for you this afternoon and a really excellent panel representing a variety of points of view, a variety of corners of the world as we discuss how to make many of the things that we've heard about over the course of this gathering, over the course of the day, actually work in practice. We've been hearing just today alone, if you think about it, many different things. We heard about competition between Ferguson and Ford. We've heard from our ministers about collaboration and how that resulted in a perspective on data and the hiring of a chief science officer. We heard just now from the mayor on how we might collaborate and form partnerships. We heard about elephant herds earlier today, all different points of view on how we might think about what it means to form partnerships. I think underneath that, the idea of bringing innovation to life ultimately is hard. And it's okay to talk about the friction, about the barriers to entry and the barriers to execution. And the good news is we have some expert panelists with us today who can help us think about how to make all of this work. And so I'd like to turn it over to them and have each of them introduce themselves and tell you what they do so that you can understand why they're here to inform you about how we might make this work. So we'll start with Dr. Michinari Hamaguchi, and then we'll just go down the panel and have each of them introduce themselves.
Thank you. Thank you very much for giving me a chance to talk about our activities. I'm currently Director General of SCADA, but before I came to this position, I was the President of Japan Science Technology Agency, JST, for 6 years and a half. And before that, I was the president of Nagoya University. So I know both sides, applying side and the funding side. So, and these 10 years, I am managing a big grant mainly. For example, besides vaccine R&D, I'm also responsible for WPI. This is the World Premier Institute Initiative. It's a very special program to select top scientists in each universities. We have right now 12 groups, and another one is Moonshot. I started when I was president of JST. Now we have 7 programs. Each has more than $1 billion as a budget. And in addition to that, recently I was requested to take care of JPICS. This is another program to take care of the middle class universities. Anyway, these projects, in one word, I can tell you, vision-oriented, vision-driven program. It's different from, curiosity-driven program. We design the future. Let me explain a little bit about the key point of management. For example, I think COI, Center of Innovation, recently we have 10 years anniversary, and we enter second phase. This is a typical program. I can tell you the key point, several points. First one is, we call it under one roof. Under one roof. What does it mean? Okay, in Japan, to be honest, we have huge gap between industries and academia. Even if we use same word, meaning is different. It's really difficult to trust each other. To make the trust, we finally found we need daily conversation. So we offer building in each university, and in a daily basis, we offer a chance to discuss the project. This is the first point. And second point is a backcast approach. Backcast approach is something close to endpoint research or something, but rather a conceptual one. We set, from the funding agency, we request the research team to visualize an ideal society. They think about it. And at the start point, we setting R&D plans toward the realization of the society. We request a certain period of discussion before starting project. And then start experiment. Third point is a kind of intensive support. We organize governing board, and under the governing board, we select program officers. And we send program officers to each university. So we communicate almost every month. And once a year, we visit site. We call it a site visit program. This is the third point. Fourth point, I can tell you, is vision, vision-driven. To lead the program to have clear direction, we request vision. That's important to give clear orientation among researchers. Let me introduce some of them. One case we requested, for example, smart life care, ageless society. This is based on our society's change, because Japan is rapidly aging society. We need new idea to vitalize society, even if we aged so rapidly. So we have been discussing this point. This is a typical word. And so, last point I want to tell you is we have estimated the economical efficiency 2 years ago after we passed 8 years. And what we found, we had, if we compare the direct investment effect, we have 8 times higher than initial cost we set for the research, and 18 times the indirect investment effect we got. So we concluded this is successful. So then we can enter second phase 2 years ago. This is a typical management. I can introduce you. Is it okay?
Yes, thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and I'm delighted to be here to be part of the panel to discuss and contribute, but to discuss Intertrade Ireland's contribution to driving innovation partnerships. Just to set Intertrade Ireland in a context, we're a unique organisation with a unique remit. We're one of the 6 bodies created under the Good Friday Belfast Agreement to grow trade and economic cooperation between both parts of the island, between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. And in doing that, a key part of our remit is to stimulate and support collaborative innovation on an all-island basis or cross-jurisdiction basis as a key enabler to grow competitiveness and the productivity of SMEs. And we are, in both Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, we're 2 economies dominated by small businesses. So in practice, we stimulate and support and fund cross-jurisdictional, in this case cross-border, and cross-sectoral innovation partnerships both on a business-to-business basis, on a business-to-academia basis, on an industry-to-industry basis, and more recently between clusters that really encompasses the whole of the ecosystem, the triple helix of industry, your large company, your small company, your multinational, along with the public sector and academia. So a very powerful combination. But I suppose by also facilitating these partnerships on the island, we're connecting the island to international networks like Horizon Europe, which is really important. We also support the US-Ireland R&D partnership, which is a really unique tri-jurisdictional research partnership between the Northern Ireland researchers in the 3 jurisdictions who are focusing on global priority areas of sustainability, of cyber, of health, of energy. And I think that's really moving to an interesting place where that research will move closer to commercialisation and to industry, which I think is really exciting for the future. But I suppose for us as an organisation, and trying to, I suppose, accelerate the speed of adoption and inclusivity in terms of innovation, we see developing clusters and partnerships on an all-island basis as a key priority for our organisation, but a key priority for both economies, and we want to scale the level of cross-border collaboration, but we want to increase SME participation in clusters. And we know from research, European research undertaken, that startups grow 141% more quickly when they're part of a cluster, and that in itself is a case alone. They export across more frontiers, they attract more skills, they're more productive and they're more competitive, and that's really what this is about. And they play a key role then linking research and academia to accelerate solutions in our shared priority areas of sustainability and energy and cyber. So, and I think as an island we have funded many existing connections between clusters on a cross-jurisdictional basis, but many all-island clusters in fintech, in cyber and other areas. As an island, our reputation in this area is growing, and in 2025 we're hosting the prestigious TCI, Global TCI Network Conference, which has become a key international platform for discussing global trends on clusters and innovation ecosystem. So I'm going to stop there and look forward to the discussion later on.
Ma'am?
Yes, thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I've been at ASU since 2021. 17 years before that, I was at Virginia Tech in Blacksburg, Virginia. I went to ASU as the Vice President for Research, and then more recently I moved into a new role, Vice President of Knowledge Enterprise Initiatives, and I'm based in Washington, D.C. And if you know anything about ASU, you know, all of the typical departments and walls that you would typically be associated with academic environments were torn down years ago by President Crow, and much like the names of our units, my name is very much, the name of my position is very much on what does that mean. And so I've spent the last few years, ASU, let me back up a minute. ASU is a unique higher ed institution in that the pace and scale that we move is very much driven by the vision and energy of our president, Michael Crow, and very much accountable to the communities we serve, socially, economically, culturally, overall health, very much driven by the vision of measured by who we include, not who we exclude. And so as a result, it's a very interesting place to be in the roles that I've had. So I've spent a lot of time looking at our capabilities across our vast research expertise, academic expertise, and how they ladder up to wicked challenges of our time, and thinking strategically about that. And so as the Vice President of Research, I have the opportunity to really think about structurally, organizationally, how are we going to move at the scale and the pace that our president's demanding we move, and then how are we going to capitalize on the unprecedented resources that are coming out of the United States federal government over the last few years with the Inflation Reduction Act and the CHIPS Plus Science Act. And we can't meet the demands of the charter, the vision of the charter, or meet the demands of the impact we think ASU can make unless we're thinking about robust partnerships and meeting the needs of our partners. And so my role in Washington, D.C. is to have a detailed understanding of capabilities, how those ladder up to strategic impact areas. And the charge of my position is growing and diversifying partnerships, collaborations, resource streams, and as President Crow would often say, everything imaginable that is going to allow ASU to continue to advance its impact and take advantage of the region and the nation's capital. And so I think some examples of ASU's tremendous growth over the last 20 years, we're about to top $1 billion in research expenditures. And with much of the resources come out of the federal government, for example, the CHIPS Plus Science Act, we were able to compete and win one of the 8 microelectronics commons hubs. That has 170 partners and members associated with it. Global Foundries, Sandia National Labs, Applied Materials, Auburn University, Texas A&M, Rice University, Florida International, Honeywell, Intel, TSMC. So these robust partnerships allow us to bring these groups together and convene these groups around a common need and idea has kind of been our special sauce that we've evolved over the last few years for us to compete. The NSF Engines, Regional Engines Program, we were fortunate to collaborate with University of Nevada, Las Vegas, University of Utah, obviously Arizona State, into a regional sustainability hub focused on clean energy transition, water security, all the things that are impacting the South. You know, you have Salt Lake City, you have Phoenix, and you have UNLV, some of the 3 fastest growing populations in the United States, yet we're sitting in the middle of the desert where we have some of the most robust resource constraints. So how are we going to be there 50 years from now and thinking about sustainability? And then the third example of partnerships that we've been successful is we recently won a Clean Energy Manufacturing Institute that's very much focused on electrification of large-scale industry processes. So we brought the food industry to the table. We brought the entertainment and recreation industry to the table, chemical and petroleum industry to the table. And so we found a way to convene around these wicked challenges of our time and yet capture the resources we need to be innovative and move solutions forward. And so I think I'll stop there.
Reza?
Okay, thank you. Happy to be here. My name is Razif. I'm the head of International Partnership for MITE. So basically, as the Master of Ceremony mentioned, that MITE basically stands for Malaysian Industry Government Group for High Technology. So by the name itself, you know that we are a platform that brings together government and industry to work on high-tech areas. So we have been around for the past 30 years, working on many of the high-tech sectors, like, for example, aerospace, rail, shipbuilding, ship repair, automotive, and etc. But it is through consensus building and also foresight methodology that actually help us to get this thing together and provide government's advice and also in advisory to government and also to industry. So my particular portfolio is basically to create Grand Challenges program between Malaysia and also our country partners. We started back in 2014 with the UK. If you remember the Newton Fund, so that was us with the UK. It's called the Newton Nkrumah Fund. And then with that same particular model, we actually moved to other countries. Spain, we moved to Turkey, and now we're also moving to with Indonesia and also to South Korea. So we saw that the joint funding programs actually work, especially when you talk about bringing industry and also university to work on grand challenges. It really sort of break the barriers between the two, when they need to actually develop the proposal together in creating innovations and solutions, and etc. So I think I'll stop there first. Yeah.
Sure. And Kem?
All right, thank you. Can you hear me? Yeah, thank you. So my name is Kem Kumba, and I am from Nairobi with the African Academy of Science. After a long career in Michigan as a faculty member at the University of Michigan, I moved to Nairobi last year. And let me start off by first of all thanking the leadership of the GFCC. I've been around with the GFCC for a few years now, and it's very, very encouraging and heartwarming to see how much Africa resonates more and more in the themes and conversations of the GFCC, and how the Global South is more and more involved in this more international conversation. So I want to acknowledge that and thank the GFCC leadership. Now, from the African Academy of Science, I serve there as the head of policy and partnerships. And it is Africa's largest community of scholars, not only science, it's actually across the board, humanities and social sciences as well. And we have about 800 fellows from across the continent at all but 3 countries. So we're a pan-continental institution that supports, broadly speaking, policy and practice of science. We're Africa's intellectual community. And so at that level, our work looks mostly at African development in broad themes. Many have probably heard about Africa's youth bulge and the demographic shifts that are occurring more and more. And that in the next 1 or 2 generations, Africa will have 40% of the young people in the world will be African, in Africa. And that's a potential that can serve the globe, become the talent pool for global solutions, the talent pool for technology, for the things that would serve our common needs as humanity. So the challenge becomes from the academy, how do we turn this human demography into human capital, into scientific capital? The challenges on the continent are peculiar. I guess regionally everyone has their own peculiarities, but they are peculiar. After so many years of less investment in higher education to provide the upper end tier scientific knowledge that dominates many of these discussions about high tech, IT, semiconductors, AI, we are now looking at how to reinvent African higher education, broadly speaking. There are over 4,000 universities in Africa. These young people will go through these institutions. And how do we retool them? How can we be innovative? After so many years, there's a character to these universities, to these institutions. How do you reinvent them, retool them? How do you manage the governance that's sometimes under political leadership? How do you manage funding that's sometimes very scarce and maybe dominantly coming from outside sources, the donor community? And how do you manage infrastructure? How do you work on that to retool the higher ed systems to turn these young people into the world's talent and development pool? That's been one of the big things that we've been working on. And so our innovation, if I will call it innovation, has been how to reimagine development, human capital, out of which the specific research labs then can produce the solutions that we are thinking about for the various problems that not only Africa faces, but the whole world faces. So we've retooled how we train the next generation of scientists on the continent. Higher education has been mostly what we'll call in the Global South, education for certification. Get a degree and you're done, piece of paper in your hands. Now we've talked earlier in these conversations, it was mentioned about there have been four stages. The earlier higher ed 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, now it's 4.0. We are trying to go from 3.0 a little bit upwards. So we are devising more innovative model on how we have conversations with our benefactors from the global north, those who support higher education in Africa. Where should your money go? How should we arrange it so that you train the top talent who stay on the continent and don't migrate up north and develop the continent and transform the industries and the raw materials? That has been our key focus. And there are quite a few examples that I could get into specifically, but I'm not sure I want to take all the time to micro detail it. But that's in a nutshell, a key, not the only, but a key mandate, a key activity of the academies that we're working on. Turning the global talent pool of young people into the global solution pools for all the problems that mankind would face in the near future.
And thinking about how to deal with insufficient resources and perhaps underinvestment in some of the key components of what it takes to be innovative and build out partnerships, I think is something that all of us can relate to in different ways. Rasif, we've talked before about approaching some of these challenges through structured and well-planned models. Can you share with the audience your thoughts on science diplomacy?
Sure.
As a solution to challenges.
Yes, of course. Take, like, for example, GFCC. The way we look at it, GFCC is a perfect platform to bring, let's quote, science attaché, bringing the best minds together on the same table, finding this, bringing the problems together and work out the solutions together, best practices. But just to help to frame how we look at things, let's put it using FIRST first. Methodology that we actually use that for many of our program. So, of course, first we have to look at the financial implication that's going to happen whenever we talk about any innovation that we want to together. When we do joint funding, the positive impact is because we're spending half, but the same impact. Infrastructure, can we actually leverage on each other's strengths and strategic assets instead of telling the government, oh, we need to build a new buildings, new center of excellence. No, we actually can leverage on each other's networks of infrastructures. In terms of regulatory, of course, this is no issue because we know the true north. Of course, SDGs is going to be there, energy transitions is there, so all of us are working towards the same true north. Skills and talents, we're bringing the best mind to the table, no problem about that. And technology, of course, we're developing technology not just for between one country to another, but actually for the global benefit. So that's why science diplomacy is actually a good model and practices that we actually need to adopt. Every one of us in the hall should be the science attaché that we can actually bring the solutions to 3-feet level and also build more linkages between countries. Thank you.
Thank you. I actually have the same question for you, Matt and Margaret, but from different points of view. We're sitting in a university space, and as a university employee myself, we're often looked to be conveners and as a safe space, if you will, or as a source of intellectual capital. and can be positioned to bring different sectors together. Arizona State has certainly done that, and Margaret, you referred to universities within the portfolio of partners. Can each of you, from your points of view, speak to the role of the university in the creation of cross-sector partnerships from your point of view? I would just Matt first, and then we'll.
Sure. Yeah, I think universities, I think we're obligated to be the conveners. I think we're well positioned in an unbiased approach to do that. Arizona State has taken some unique approaches to this around the city of Phoenix, and we have 9, they seem to grow by the day, maybe 10 innovation zones. And Phoenix is, quite large to get across, but we have an innovation zone in downtown Phoenix. It's a Phoenix Biosciences Core that has really become the center of gravity around our health innovation. And Northern Arizona University has positioned themselves there for allied health degrees. University of Arizona has positioned themselves there with one of their 2 medical schools. We have space, and that's going to be the home of our new medical school that we're about to launch. So that's one example. A second example I'll give is Macro Technology Works. Phoenix has invested tremendously over the last 20 years in the semiconductor microelectronics industry. Intel's been there for years. TSMC, the last couple years, has a presence there. And ASU acquired a facility that was run and owned by Motorola at one point, and now that has become what is probably the largest, most sophisticated microelectronics fabrication facility that any higher ed institution has. And that's been integral in that Applied Materials has recently moved into that space and is prototyping new tools associated with the semiconductor space. We can partner with Intel and TSMC when they want to onboard new employees. They're not going to shut down their line of tools in semiconductor manufacturing, but they can train on our tools. So I think those types of innovation zones, understanding the need of industry, whether it be workforce, whether it be technology, and trying to find these spaces, these sources of knowledge and technology that are a win-win for both organizations.
So actually, before I turn to you, Margaret, Michinara, if you could speak to it specifically in health sciences, and then, Margaret, I'll have you finish us up to speak to it specifically in Ireland. How about that?
Can I introduce the place-based innovation in our program?
Sure.
Okay, because I love that word. And COI designed for the future, but on the other hand, we made it place-based innovation. We planned, and each place has a unique culture, unique universities, and also unique companies. So when we called the proposal, for example, in case of Nagoya University, we collaborate with Toyota company, and in case of Hiroshima, they collaborate with Mazda because they have companies. And both we plan to invent new type more automobiles, but result was completely different because of the culture. In case of Nagoya, we focus on the safe driving for elderly people. So conclusion is, automated driving system. But as you can agree, driving, we need fun to drive. Some people loves to drive rather than let them go. In the case of Mazda and Hiroshima, they collaborate with brain scientists and analyze the brain response. When they feel enthusiasm, how brain respond, which part of the brain respond. And through the driving system, they analyze what kind of factor activates their brain. And they made new type car like Mazda. It's cultural difference. And in case of Hirosaki University, let me explain. This area is the northern part of Japan, heavily snowed. 2 meters, 3 meters in the even night we have. So longevity, life length is the shortest in Japan. They think this is a problem, and younger people left these areas. So their ideas focus on how to make healthy longevity with university, city, and prefecture, all combined. And they extensively every year analyze the body condition. And this analysis attracts many companies related to the healthy product. So they have many companies collaborate right now. So this university is very active and famous in Japan. Weakness causes the innovation. Oh, that's it.
Margaret, you want to bring us right back here? Yeah. This place-based.
Our universities here, obviously, in Queen. Our universities here have, right across the island, have a very strong record in terms of industry engagement. But I think we can never forget it can be challenging for a small business to engage with a university, with an academic institution. So I still think there is a need for that facilitator role, and that's a lot of the work that we do as an organisation and other organisations do. For so many small businesses, they know they need to do something different, they have an idea, but sometimes to approach a university is quite a challenging exercise. So we play a key role in terms of signposting the business to and taking the fear out of it. Then when you make that connection and make that link, that link is created and continues into the future with many more interactions. But the universities are a key part of the ecosystem and the whole. We're obviously, as I said earlier, we're promoting the clustering as a way to accelerate innovation for businesses, and universities are a key part of that triple helix of industry, public sector and academia.
So with that, I thank you all for your attention. I thank my colleagues for their insights, and I wish you all then join the rest of our panels for the rest of the afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Joan, and that entire panel for those global insights into what are global challenges. I get to sit down now as we face in the world today. We have distinguished figures from North and South, not Ireland this time, but the Northern and Southern hemispheres, to discuss whether in fact we can cooperate more across the world to tackle global issues like climate change, pandemics like COVID-19 and artificial intelligence, whether we should cooperate in what I think we all fear is a deeply divided world, what happens if we cooperate, and what the risks are if we do not. So joining me in conversation, I would ask you to welcome David Donoghue, the former Irish ambassador to the United Nations and the co-chair of UN negotiations on sustainable development goals. In fact, as I was saying earlier, David actually wrote the book. Dr. Hippolyta Fofak, originally from Cameroon, now a research associate at Harvard University, a fellow at Columbia, also in the United States, an economist and a distinguished fellow at the GFCC. And graciously returning for another panel is Dr. Nkem Kumba from the African Academy of Sciences and also at the GFCC. I hope they're paying you double. I hope so too. Welcome to you all. I'd like to start with just a quick overview, if I might, maybe in 1 minute or so, all three of you, because it seems to me that the gap between, let's just call it the industrialized North and what we now call the global South, is in fact growing, not diminishing. And I wonder if you would like to speak about that. David, maybe you could kick us off.
Sure, Bill. Great pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me. I just explained that my role was to lead the negotiations on the Sustainable Development Goals at the UN in 2015. I did that with my Kenyan colleague. To answer your question, Bill, at that time, we framed these goals as a partnership of equals. That was 193 countries, rich and poor, large and small, global North and global South, who were all equally important, had equal entitlements. That was very much the mood when we launched into the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. But in the meantime, it's fair to say that some of that partnership has weakened for a number of reasons, which no doubt we will get into. I can see opportunities to try to correct that over the next while, but there is definitely a gulf between North and South right now, and that means that in particular development finance, to enable us to achieve sustainability, to achieve the SDGs and indeed the climate objectives, that development finance is missing, and really we need to find ways of bridging that gap rapidly.
Dr. Fofak, do you agree? We've got the G7 industrialized countries, for example, and we've got the BRICS group of countries with India claiming to represent the global South. Do you feel the gulf is actually widening in the world?
I think from a geopolitical standpoint, the gulf is widening, definitely. But if you look at the economic standpoint, and there are actually two global South. There is the emerging global South, where we've seen income convergence, and there is the non-emerging global South, the low-income countries, the frontier market. The gulf between those and advanced economy has been growing quite rapidly for the reason that you mentioned. But from a geopolitical standpoint, I think the gulf has been growing, perhaps motivated by economic reason. The issue of great power rivalry, for instance, the issue of competition for global leadership is also incentivizing those divide.
And Dr. Kumba, a world split not just in two, but in three, perhaps. Is that familiar to you, for example, in Africa?
Yes, it's of course very obvious. I echo what my fellow panelists have said. The economic indicators are there. There's a lot of data in the different fora on the GDP, higher human capital, or what indicates where what we're going to call development stages are. And I am glad that you mentioned the BRICS, for example. I think we're at a point where, with all this differentiation, the model that currently exists is not being accepted by those at the bottom of the pyramid. Because social media now has democratized access to information. A child in a village in Africa can see what a child in Mexico is doing and what a child in China or in Washington, D.C. is doing. And they ask a simple question: why is the difference? Why am I here? What did my ancestors do wrong? What is my government not doing right? What is the global order telling us? Where do we fit in these ranks? And so it's raising more questions that, from my point of view in Africa, we are asking, they need a better bargain in the global landscape of things. You will see this in our leaders who are questioning the global financial architecture, who are telling the G7 that you mentioned earlier that if the structures remain the way they are, we would rather join what is now being called BRICS, where we might find an alternative, which is an unknown, but still an alternative from what is currently known. So there's clearly differentiation, and those at the bottom of that differentiation are telling the world there needs to be a better bargain.
So we have a world that's split into two, possibly three blocks. David, you were a diplomat. One of your jobs as a diplomat was always to build friendships and to build trust. How do you build, do you think, trust today, given what we've just heard from all of you about division?
No, it's a huge question, Bill. If I may say so, strictly speaking, the Global South could be divided into about 10 or 20 subdivisions. I mean, if you begin with the huge players like Brazil, Russia, China, because they count as Global South, and then if you go all the way down to the poorest countries, and when we were framing these goals, we were trying in particular to target the poorest countries. So a lot of trust has definitely evaporated. I would pick out as one factor the failure of the Global North to ensure an equitable distribution of vaccines during the pandemic. That undoubtedly was a big blow to confidence. The failure of the multilateral development banks to reform themselves in a way which would help the interests of the poorest countries. This was a commitment that they all made, that the banks and the financial system made when signing the SDGs, when signing a thing called the Addis Ababa Action Agenda. So if you like, it's a promise that has not been fulfilled several years later. And I do think that those two factors in particular have contributed to this distrust. On the other hand, there are ways of overcoming it. And one thing I do find of interest is that there is a growing tendency, and my two colleagues will perhaps be commenting on this, there's a growing tendency in, for example, Africa, to get away from an aid dependency, to focus more on the mutual interest argument between North and South.
Trade, not aid.
Exactly. So yeah. I'll having flagged that point, I'm sure we'll get into it now.
Yeah, Dr. Fufang, the vaccine scandal, if you can call it that, where we were faced with a crisis, and as soon as the crisis happened, the West looked after itself. Do you still feel resentful? Do countries still feel resentful that when push comes to shove, the North will just look after itself?
I think there was no resentment. I think that the real issue, we see it as a continuity on a pattern which has been going on for some time. And if you look at the way the international financial architecture is actually structured, and the fact that Germany is paying, for instance, 2.5% on its 10-year bonds, while Nigeria is paying 20.7%, illustrate the difference. We have a real contrast today whereby what you call the developing South has become a net creditor to the rest of the world as a result of those interest rates, default-driven borrowing rate that they're incurring, which undermine that push for global convergence that Ambassador talked about. So there is an issue there which has a long history. But to really achieve the SDGs, which remain a very important goal, we have to find a way to frame a development agenda in a way that is beneficial to everybody. And partnership, quite frankly, has been and will remain the cornerstone of global growth and global convergence. And how do we make sure that the partnership works? Some partnership have worked. If you take Vietnam, for instance, Vietnam relationship between Vietnam and the US, over a decade, Vietnam has become one of the top exporters to the US. Why? Because they managed to enter the manufacturing space, the frontier market, getting into trading manufactured goods. And most of the cell phone that we carry is manufactured in Vietnam, but the raw materials come from the DRC, which is not part of the value additions. So the partnership has to be one that results into value creations and value additions. I think that's what we should be pushing. And I'm pleased to report that under the GFCC, we're actually working with the African Union to devise a partnership which will actually be one that responds to the challenges facing African country, whether in the manufacturing, in the engineering, in the harmonization of standard, to create the condition for boosting intra-African trade. But it's very important to make sure that partnership works.
Vietnam is an extraordinary story. Dr. Kumba, as we speak, there are delegates from every country in the world at COP.
talking about the biggest problem that we face in the world, climate change. Yes. And yet so many of the leaders are not there and will not come. Not Biden, not Macron, not Schulz, not Modi. It's not a good look. If we're talking about partnership and cooperation, it doesn't seem to be happening over there at the moment.
I'm glad you bring that up. I think I'll take a little more blunt attitude towards this. You mentioned COVID and the vaccine. It was more than the global north taking care of itself, ignoring the rest. They actually impeded the south from getting the vaccine on their own. And our leaders tell us that the global north actually put blocks on their way of getting their own vaccine. So it goes beyond just retrenching. On that development, it's not an absence of knowing what to do. It's a purposeful policy. And the global north has to really, really look closely. As the world shrinks and becomes small, I was mentioning how the demographics means Africa will become 1/4 of human population soon. The global north is struggling with its own internal demographics, migration, climate is affecting everybody almost at equal level, health outcomes. How do we coexist? If the global north doesn't face it in the mirror and see there must be a different bargain with the south that uplifts them and create a better playing field for everybody, then it might be very challenging. The SDGs, the COP agendas, the global north speaks a good language, but they are not on the table when the policy has to implement it. And that's very clear. There is reluctance from even some in the south to still be having this conversation, because after so many years of the conversation, it's difficult. The SDGs were 6 years from 2030. They all know it's not going anywhere, but they're still saying the same thing all the time. So at some point, there has to be a realization that we live in the same village. And either we give each other a good bargain, or we set conditions for a more challenging future for mankind.
David, this must sound very familiar to you, and I just wonder what you think of COP at the minute. And
well, I mean, I think this COP is not going to produce anything particularly significant, but there is a hope that maybe as one looks to the next COP in Brazil, that there could eventually be a comprehensive agreement on climate finance. I mean, that seems to be the goal. But overall, Bill, multilateralism is not going through a good period at the moment. In other words, faith in the UN or other multilateral organizations to come up with global solutions to global problems, faith is weakening a bit. Now, on the positive side, the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, even if we're only at about 16% of implementation at this stage, nevertheless, there's still a huge amount of political commitment to them, and this can be measured in various ways. So the world isn't actually achieving what it set out to do, but it still feels that this is the right way to go. And to answer the point that you brought up, I think personally what will happen is that when we get to 2030, we will flip over the present SDGs, and they'll then have a new name like the 2050 agenda. So it's not as if these goals are going to disappear. They're going to stay with us because nobody has challenged them. So there's an odd disconnect between political, public enthusiasm for the SDGs, but yet we're not doing very much about them.
And finally, yes, goals are fine, promises are fine, it's the delivery, and so often the delivery falls short.
Yes, I think it falls short for a number of reasons. If you look at the current global financial architecture, we have a configuration whereby most multilateral development banks do not have enough resources. They are undercapitalized. So we have to find a way to boost the capital structure, to give them more resources to deploy. And then the second issue that these banks face is that now we've entered a new arena of global challenges, whether it's climate change or pandemic, or even the SDGs. Some may require a regional development approach. In other words, cross-border projects like infrastructure. But the way these banks are currently structured, they actually engage countries bilaterally. So we have to find a way for this bank to be able to deploy resources for global challenges, for cross-border challenges. In fact, that may actually be the better way to do in terms of economies of scale, in terms of development impact, in terms of deepening global integrations. I think it's something that can be done and should be encouraged.
We are going to wrap it up there. I wish we had more time because it seems wrong to spend just 20 minutes talking about these global challenges. But ladies and gentlemen, please thank our panelists. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Great, thank you, David. Thank you, Drs. Fofak and Kumba. And that brings us to our final panel conversation of the day, this time staying global and exploring how global shifts in demographics, for example, our aging population, technology, the rise of robotics and AI, climate change again, and our increasingly troubled and divided political systems, how these interconnect and what the effect might be on competitiveness and cooperation around the world. Moderating this panel will be Deborah Wince-Smith, who's the president of the GFCC and president and CEO of the US Council on Competitiveness. And Deborah will be joined by the following panelists: Mr. Charles Chad Holliday, the chairman of the GFCC. Once again for a second appearance, Dr. Hippolyte Fofak, the Distinguished Fellow of the GFCC, and Hiro Nishiguchi of the Global Entrepreneur Network of Japan. We also welcome Jeremy Breckheisen of the Gallup firm that, among other things, of course, consults and monitors public opinion, Gallup surveys for Europe, the Middle East and Africa, and finally James Applegate, who is the United States Consul General in Northern Ireland. Deborah, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, we don't have a coffee break, so we're going to liven you up when we talk about these incredible global landscape shifts, tectonic shifts, and how we're navigating that. So I thought, you know, if you just look back 2 years and think what has happened in space-time, I don't even think that's a second. But we really are facing, in these last 2 years, almost the equivalent of the geostorms we saw in Brian Cox's constellation of everything swirling around on geopolitical strategic issues, on energy, on technology moving so fast, on demographics, political opinions around the world. So we really have to have facts and knowledge and be prepared to take risks and move forward to create this new world. We have an absolutely fantastic panel. Our colleague, Hiro Nakazuchi, could not be with us. He had to return. But I want to start out with you, Jeremy. You are probably have more knowledge in your head than any of us here and what's really going on in the world based on hard data that Gallup is, I think, the global leader, actually, in how you not only obtain that data through surveys and interviews, but how you do it in such an advanced way to understand the real mood and temperature of our world.
Given I'm paid to think Gallup is the best, I agree with you. Listen, I thought I'd share just a lay of the land for my colleagues to build on. First of all, one of the things that we believe is really important to understand is that there is more than just a financial economy out there. There's an emotional economy, and that it gets ignored far too often. In fact, we saw this happen when we track well-being of pretty much every country, about 140 to 160 countries every year around the world with representative samples. We not only do web surveys, but we actually will go into the rice paddies of China and we will interview people face to face. We make sure we have truly representative samples. What we're finding is that well-being is struggling. And we see in countries there's specific dynamics. So for example, in 2000, 2008, 2007, 2008, we saw the Arab Spring, right? Well, prior to that, GDP of Tunisia and Egypt was going up and up and up and up. The financial economy was great. But we were measuring well-being and saw it was going down and down and down and down. If you make money at the expense of your people, it can create revolution. That happens for companies, countries, even your own body. Now, what we've seen is that it's driving some specific things. We've been able to geo-map it to weather patterns, and we can see that climate change is lowering well-being. And in those areas of the world where it's lower, higher climate change impacts near the equator, there's lowering well-being, which increases migration patterns. And we see that in sub-Saharan Africa, 37% of people want to leave. In Europe, in the EU, that's 20%. In pre-Soviet East Asia, that's 13% want to leave. So you can see there's differences, and it's driving migratory patterns that create political unrest, that create a lot of other things. It was mentioned earlier, I think by our colleague, that 40% of the world's young people are going to be in Africa. Well, they're coming to you. Many of them want to leave, and some of them will stay, but they're going to come. And by the way, that's good for everybody. The other thing that we see is soft power in Africa is changing. For the first time, our data shows China is more favored than the US in many African nations. Specifically, Ghana, it's gone up by 15 basis points. Russia has recovered and is also not being seen as negative anymore 2 years after the incursions with Ukraine. So we see a lot of that. We also see little hope in the Middle East for peace on both sides. And in Europe, we see that this is an area that is the lowest engagement in the world in terms of employee engagement. All other regions of the world are more engaged. There is less clarity about what employees are going to do today in Europe than anywhere else. They feel less recognized and valued than anywhere else in the world. They feel less connected to the mission and purpose of their company than anywhere else in the world. And so that's just a little bit of the lay of the land in terms of what's going on. There's a lot more, but I think I should stop.
All right, we're going to come back, of course, Hippolyte, to talk about Africa and our Council General as well on the perspective here in the United States. But let me turn to you, Chad. You have had a career as a CEO of major corporations on boards. You have been, as I have said earlier this week, leading global efforts to deal with sustainability and the energy transition. How do you feel the temperature is now in the world in this time of great turbulence and transformation? Are you confident? Are you seeing positive change? I know you lead a group called Mission Impossible, so we'd love your perspective.
Possible.
Mission Possible. Mission Impossible. You're right, it has to be Mission Possible.
Yeah. It's been a long day, but thank you for being here. And I would say, to answer your question, Deborah, I listen to what Jeremy has to say. I think if you think about the few things he went over, there are very profound statements he made all in about 6 seconds. You know? So I really urge you to look at the Gallup data because it's real. And when you interview people in their shack in a developing country, you get a different perspective than when you feed from the internet. What I would say today is we have a very disorderly world. If you go back for the previous 75 years before today, if I knew A, I knew B, I knew C, I could pretty well predict D. In the world we're in today, I don't know if there's going to be a D. I have no idea where it is. So it's a very different point of time. What most of us do as individuals, as companies or governments, is we decide where we are today is a lot better in an uncertain world, and we stay put. We don't make a lot of change because we think that's better than where we are. I don't know whether there's any logic to say that. So what I would suggest to you is 2 areas where I think you can move in this uncertain world, and you'll be glad you did. The first is around artificial intelligence. Yeah, it is going to change things in ways we have not seen. Some people say it's going to change things like the computer did, or the internet did, or the mobile phone did. I think it's like the printing press did. Think back before we had a printing press, the way you got books is a monk sat there and wrote them out. So you got the Bible and that was about it. But the idea of what books could do just did not make a difference. With the printing press, all of a sudden, you had a big productivity improvement in monks, but that was almost rounding error compared to how you changed education. How do you have a university without a book? So it was a massive change. That's what artificial intelligence is going to do again. I don't know exactly how, but as you see how it's going to impact things you care about, jump on those themes. You won't regret it. The second one is, for the last 20 years, we've said we had weird weather. Weather just didn't like it used to be, for 20 years. What we've seen in the last 3 years is we've got some really bad weather. You talk about the floods we've just seen in Spain. You talk about the thousands of people that died this last summer from heat. It's a very different weather situation. If you are a government or a company, your people are going to look to you and say, you need to help me adapt to this different kind of weather. So I think you're very safe making changes now to adapt to a different weather pattern. Thank you, Deborah.
Thank you. Well, you know, I just want to ask one follow-up on the AI revolution. We learned a lot about AI, heard from experts during the last few days. What do you think about the power of human, emotional-centered AI? Are AI systems going to be able to sense what we feel and what we understand? Because so many of these global turbulence and all this is caused through emotions, back to your point, Jeremy. So maybe both of you could address that, because is AI going to tell you all the answers we need to know?
We just found a data point that says only 1 in 10 European companies say that generative AI is helping their employees have more opportunities to do what they do best every day. So essentially, forget the idea of it replacing you. It's not even augmenting your job effectively yet. There is huge work that needs to be done, and Europe is last place on adopting AI right now. And the reason is not a lack of capital, it's a lack of corporate culture. They're not ready for it. Specifically, they're not good at decision making, they're not good at how they encourage ideas, and they're not good at their ways of working. They don't look to simplify, they look to regulate. And so those things are creating barriers that we've been writing a lot of reports on recently. And so if you want, even if you're going to go slow on AI adoption, go fast on the culture that will help you adopt it in the future.
Hippolyte, you just spoke about Africa, the continent, the tremendous potential. You're an economist. You've been the chief economist at the Afrim-Exim Bank. You're now at Harvard and Columbia. How do you feel, based on what Jeremy said, and how do you sense the mood in Africa? I mean, this data that Africa is feeling more aligned with China than the West is concerning, and what do you attribute that to? Is it investment, or is it cultural, or both?
I think maybe a bit of both. I think it's fair to say that it's also found its root in the global environment, whereby we've seen a lot of change in the world, as you mentioned, the opening remark, in the way new power are emerging. We've seen a shift in global trade from a contest dominated by the West toward the center of gravity, moving east, at least in terms of manufacturing. And what is interesting is that even though the center of gravity of trade has moved east, the financing of it remains very much anchored in the West, whether it is the city in London or New York. So we have that bifurcations where trade has moved east and financing has remained in the West. And Africa essentially caught in the middle, whereby there's a need for Africa to trade. You saw that in 2009, China became Africa's first trading partner, overtaking the US, which has been in that pole position for decades. But Africa still depends very much on the US for financing. And under that boost that we saw in 2009, and China's actually established what we call a long-term partnership with Africa called FOCAC, Forum for China-Africa Corporations, which has been the venue for disbursing the capital that Africa needs for its infrastructure and for agriculture, you name it, for energy. And just as we speak, 2 months ago in China, Beijing, they had a FOCAC where China made a commitment to disburse for the next 3 years, a 3 years rolling framework, to disburse $50 billion for that cycle, which was a $10 billion increment compared to last cycle where it was just about $40 billion. And what is China doing in Africa? Essentially, we've got to the point where most infrastructure in Africa today are actually financed by China, which was not the case just 2 decades ago when the US and European come to play a major role in that regard. And China's actually overtaken the World Bank to a certain extent in terms of infrastructure financing within the African continent. There is a need for it. But it's also important to stress, Chair, if I may, that we tend to see China-Africa as a partnership, which is a win-win. But if we look at it closely, there are some challenges. For instance, last year, trade between Africa and China had a trade surplus of almost $60 billion, $63 billion to be more precise. And the first 6 months of this year, they had a trade surplus of $24 billion. So we have a model whereby Africa moved from Europe, where they essentially exported raw material and imported manufactured goods, toward a new engagement with China and countries in the East, whereby they are still exporting raw material and importing manufactured goods, and sustaining those trade imbalances, which are part of the debt crisis that Africa is now currently going through. So unless we have a new form of engagement, which is rooted on a win-win partnership, where Africa will enter the manufacturing stream, producing value-adding, value-creating goods, and we are going to go through several cycles of debt, and Africa will be shuttling between China and the US, between the East and the West for financing and for trade. But I think now we are at a very critical moment in that relationship between Africa and the rest of the world, where the need to actually create a new model which will actually accelerate that convergence toward the SDG is becoming even more critical.
So the debt financing model of China to offer long-term debt for infrastructure, often it's very shoddy, and then, call that debt in for countries to be in debt for years and years and years. Is that something that African leaders are willing to tolerate, or are they concerned about that?
Of course, who can tolerate that? It's just not sustainable in the sense that we went back to the HIPIC debt relief in the 1890s, late 90s actually, to help African countries reset the counter to zero so they could actually get into productive engagement. And they are back into another debt cycle, which, as Ponty mentions, drain the resources out of the continent, especially when interests are very high. So it's not something that any country is actually wishing for, because it actually shrink the fiscal space and make it very difficult to engage in really high return investment. It's something that we have to find a way to get out, and specifically by creating the condition for high return investment within the continent in a way that will actually put country on the path of fiscal and debt sustainability.
Thank you. James, serving as the United States Consul here in Northern Ireland, you're very much part of all the exciting initiatives that are underway that we've been hearing about over the last few days. Are you confident and excited that when we come back here, hopefully 5 years in the GFCC, what will we see in terms of the progress?
Well, I think that's one of the challenges of this new economy that we're in, is that none of us really know. I don't think anybody can predict confidently what AI is going to look like, how that's going to impact particular industries. And I think it presents a huge challenge for governments on kind of two fronts. First off, I think the question of how you approach this is a difficult one, because the change has just been accelerating kind of since the internet came around in the 90s. And with AI and everything, as we've talked about, it's only going to get quicker. And I think it presents a big challenge for governments, because governments we're not known for our speed. We're really going to struggle to keep up with this. So I think if your model is based on kind of the government directing the growth, I think it's going to be impossible to keep pace. I think there are huge challenges for government in kind of getting the balance right, because things like AI, I think, cry out for some sort of regulation. I think if it's a free-for-all, that's a pretty scary world to look forward to. On the other hand, it's hard to know where the tipping point is, where you regulate to the point that you're stifling innovation, and that's a huge challenge. I think if the government gets out of the way, I think there's tremendous innovation happening everywhere. On the other hand, we've seen in the internet age that the ability to kind of capture that by one company is greater than I think it was when we were talking about manufactured goods. And as somebody who spent a lot of time studying and working on economic issues, I fundamentally believe that fair markets and competition produce the best outcomes. But how do you ensure that in an environment when it's much easier to kind of grab the levers of power on the internet? And I'm sure in AI that's only going to accelerate greater. So I think it's a time of great challenges for governments. And the second way that manifests itself, I think, Jeremy, you highlighted at the beginning, which is that there's a tremendous potential for people to be and or feel left behind by this. And I love that phrase, the emotional economy, because it's absolutely matched my experience where too often I think governments, including but definitely not limited to my own, you understand there's a way out there that people feel, and you try to counter that with data. And I love data. Like the data that comes from Gallup is invaluable, but you can't counter feelings with data. If somebody feels left behind by a digital economy, you coming in and telling them the ways that their TV is cheaper because of globalization, it doesn't cut it. You need to find an emotional response to that emotional question. And again, that's something that governments historically aren't great at and are going to need to get better at, I think, in the coming years.
And we heard in the presentation of both the mayors, the history of Belfast and Manchester, it was really private sector initiative, innovation, investment that created these great cities. And the decline occurred for a variety of reasons. But the comment that everything that was being decided out of Whitehall and everything was centralized, that is something that is not going to unleash the power of innovation that we need in the 21st century. Jeremy, do you have data on how nations are thinking about this balance between the role of government and the role of the private sector in creating the well-being and prosperity in their lives?
So one example, just I was thinking as James was speaking, that we were studying about 50 really large companies in Europe. They have around $2.5 trillion in revenue, which is about 12% of the GDP. So pretty good sample. And out of those, only 2 of them were quantifying the environmental impact of generative AI. Now, all of them had carbon emission and water consumption goals, but they didn't feel the need to do that. Now, they all told me there's going to be a regulation that comes that forces them to do it, but they're not going to do it right now. So, do they really care, or are they only regulated to care? And so I think that's an example of how are they going to act until government does something. What most people believe when you actually ask them is that government is getting more in the way than helping usually. And they'd like them to be careful of the side that James talked about, of stifling this. Now, there are plenty of people who are on the other side. And it's usually the more liberal you are in your politics, the more you want government to be involved, whatever party that might be, and whatever government you might be in the world. The more conservative, the more you want them to stay out. But to the point of this emotional piece, if you just try to tell them data, it doesn't work. And one of the things that we find in more conservative, is from an emotional perspective, is if they feel like they're being talked down to, if they feel left behind, if they're being told they're outdated, they will rebel against that. They don't fall in line with that.
And do you think some of those trends were reflected in the recent U.S. election? I had to ask that.
Yeah, so...
Anybody but me, take that one, please.
Well, and as Gallup, Gallup, we're very neutral to this. So I think one of the key things that we noted in Trump voters is that the ones who specifically watched one source of news, they could be tricked to believe anything. The ones who had a variety of news sources, they could not be tricked to believe anything. And so the source of where they get their news makes them more or less susceptible to believing certain things. And we find a lot of those who supported Trump had one source, but there was a lot of people who switched this time. And the reason they switched, Gallup found the number one thing they cared about was the economy. And the economy is why Trump lost, and the economy is why Trump won. He lost the last time because the economy was against him. He lost this time because the economy was against the incumbent. We know that the president doesn't impact the economy as much as we all want them to. And so there's a bit of blame they take. And so no matter who was president, they were going to have a hard time winning when the number one thing was the economy, and the inflation had made it so I was still feeling like I couldn't afford things.
Chad, in your role as a corporate CEO and a leader in industry, I know over the years you have always talked about the importance of the government to set the enabling conditions for you to invest and to have certainty and to be able to go out and make the choices to develop products and services for your customers. Do you think that, certainly let's just speak about Europe here, do we have the good balance on that versus how much regulation and how much, we have to have regulation for many reasons, but it's that golden mean. Have we gone too far in some places in wanting to regulate everything?
I don't want to blame it on the government. I think that's an easy cop-out, that if you talk about you're leading an organization and you say, I'm blaming it on the government, they're probably looking for a job somewhere else the next day.
Yep.
So I think at this point in time, rather than freeze right now, it's the time to take action. And if you take action, even if it's not perfect, the people you lead will at least see you're doing something. If it looks like you freeze and you don't know what to do, they'll say, they don't know what to do, I want to go somewhere else, or certainly I'm not going to work very hard. Now, I think one key thing you can do is make your people more resilient no matter what comes up. Put development and capability in your people, have them working better as teams, have them ready to go. Now, I'll give Gallup a plug here. If there's one thing I can suggest you do, is you've got this thing called Strengths, Clifton Strengths. And it takes about an hour to take the test. I've taken it. It told me my 5 greatest strengths. They were not the 5 I thought, but after I've had those, I found that was very useful because we're all better off working on our strengths than on our weaknesses. And it's a lot more fun too. So that's a very simple thing you can do with Gallup or without Gallup. You can do that right now in every organization, including Queen's University. You can do it right now. I think we need to be doing things like that, even that we know will make us stronger no matter what's over the horizon.
Well, you know, back to the strengths and the weaknesses and optimism, our panel earlier today, we heard from this group of women the tremendous progress and the initiative, the things that they have accomplished. I want to ask you also, Jeremy, but you respond first. Do you see that this goal of bringing women, active leaders, into the mainstream of economy is something that's shared throughout, you know, most of the world, or is it pushback? But anyway, ask your first comment from Chad before.
Yeah, well, on that, and I'll go into strengths, and then I'll give someone else a chance to talk. Sorry, guys. So we find in all our data that we can measure the talents of a lot of different individuals. We find that talent is evenly distributed, but opportunity is not. And so bringing more women into the workforce is bringing highly talented individuals that you were leaving out. And that can only be good for productivity. With Clifton Strengths, one of the interesting things is the chances that you have the same top 5 Clifton Strengths in the same order as someone else is 1 in 33 million. It means that you're very unique. And there's 34 different strengths we measure. The chances you have all in the same order is 1 in 295 undecillion. Has 36 zeros, it's a real number. Scientists have estimated that only 108 billion people have ever lived on Earth. That means no one has been, no one is now, and no one ever will be, statistically speaking, like you. You're as unique as you ever thought you were. However, that also means if you are not making your unique contribution, if you're not doing what you do best today, there's no one to replace you. That contribution is simply lost. And so when you're at your best, when you're focused on your strengths, you feel less anger, you feel less sadness, you feel more happiness, you're more engaged, your well-being's higher, you even feel less physical pain. It's medicine to the body and it's medicine to the world, and we're all better off a little to a lot every day when you're focused on your strengths.
Great. James, how about, you know, yesterday when we had the fantastic presentation of the young entrepreneurs and the winners, you know, all of their projects had a social component to them. And I think some of us, you know, were a little surprised to see the extent of how much poverty and issues are still in Northern Ireland. What do you attribute that to in terms of education? Is it culture? Why are we not seeing Northern Ireland, with its great history, moving out of being the most challenged economy in the UK?
Well, I think there are real challenges here, and there are those communities I talked about before that feel left behind by the new economy. I think there are pockets of those all throughout Northern Ireland. But I don't think that's at all unique to Northern Ireland. I think that's a thing that is happening around the world. One of the things that has really struck me in my year here is when I go to underprivileged communities here in Northern Ireland, whether from a nationalist or unionist background. I grew up in post-industrial state in the Midwest in Michigan, and so I have friends who are from auto worker families, multi-generational. And what I have been struck by here is that the emotions that you hear in those neighborhoods here in Northern Ireland and the emotions that you hear in West Virginia or Pennsylvania or Michigan in the United States in a small town are almost identical. It is a completely different history, it is a completely different society, it is a completely different set of things driving those things, but the emotions are exactly the same. And if I would close my eyes, if I'm over in West Belfast or up on the Falls Road and talking to people who are struggling with generational unemployment and kind of perceived lack of opportunity, real lack of opportunity, it sounds exactly the same to me. It's the same sense of it used to be better, and there's no way for me to go, and my kids are going to grow up worse off than I did. Again, it's a massive challenge for governments because there's no easy answer to that. The types of things that governments try to do, training programs, it's so intertwined with a person's sense of identity. I mean, I think a really, really well-intentioned program from the Obama administration in the United States was they came up with this idea that people who were coal miners who had lost their jobs because coal mines were closing, we're going to teach them to code, to computer coding. And that's so divorced from where that person sees themselves. So I do think there are ways to do this. I think a big part of it is vocational education. I think that the things that Queen's does are amazing. I think there are people who are not interested and not going to thrive in this environment, going back to the strengths that you talk about. So finding a way to fund vocational education, which is something that has fallen off a cliff in the United States, but not just fund it, to also give it kind of a parity of esteem, to put it on the same level as people who come through this university. Salary-wise, that's happening, but I'm not sure that in everywhere where we might have grown up, you would look at a plumber with the same eyes you'd look at a PhD, but I think we need to start doing that. And I think that's one of the ways that we give opportunities. It's also, though, there are kids who have the talent to come and do this and would never have the opportunity. There are kids where I grew up where they every bit as smart as I was, and it would never have occurred to them to apply to a four-year university. So you need to make sure that we do kind of level that opportunity playing field that you talked about, and give people kind of multiple paths to an economic future. And I think if you do that, a lot of the rest of it gets easier.
We've heard over the last 4 days this concept of place-making innovation, place-based innovation, leveling up, and it's really an overarching theme of the work of the GFCC and the work of the Council on Competitiveness. And Chad, you're from Tennessee, and you participated in our inaugural competitiveness conversation in Tennessee that was unbelievably rich of how the collaboration is transforming Tennessee, Nashville, fastest growing city in the United States. What do you attribute that to? Why is Tennessee emerging now as just a powerhouse in the United States in terms of innovation and knitting everything together in a way to build an economy that's for all?
Deborah, that's a very timely question. I was out walking on the mall yesterday afternoon and I slipped out for about an hour, and I saw an Elvis Presley impersonator out singing. Not that good, but he was singing Elvis songs, dressed like Elvis. And it reminded me that Elvis was really a great philosopher, and he gave us great guidance in Tennessee. A little less talk, a little more action, please. Deborah, that's the answer to your question. I think what we saw in our 3 days in Tennessee is not just talk, actual actions taken to make a difference. And so that would be the advice I think we could take from that.
And everyone aligned. Everyone aligned, from industry, from academia, the labor unions. It was very, very powerful to see that cauldron of people coming together to build a better place for their next generation.
What we saw is they could align on everything but sports. There was going to be some little debates there, but I think you're exactly right. People from very different parts of life, from rural areas to the city areas, could find things in common and really make a difference.
Well, we're going to carry those conversations across America with GFCC, and the only thing that was not great about our Tennessee conversation, back to the music, was that the two chancellors promised they would deliver Taylor Swift for our evening entertainment, and it didn't happen. But last night, you know, we did hear the beauty of the Irish music and dance, and culture and music and the arts, I think, are more important than ever in the age of AI. We have 1 minute, and we're going to go into our next session, which is going to be very, very exciting, looking to the future. How about one word from everyone down the line? If you just have to give one word for navigating this future, what would it be? That's a hard one, I know.
I have to go first. I think hope. I think just have hope that as scary as this new world we're in can be, that it's going to bring, at the end of the day, when we look back, more good than bad.
Trust. If you don't trust any of this stuff, then they're not going to let you do anything with it.
The cost of fragmentation is too high. It's too high for any one country to bear. We have to stick together.
Use your strengths.
And I will say imagination. And with that, thank you for this discussion, and I think we will be returning very shortly for the end of our wonderful 3-day summit shortly. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deborah, and to those panelists, especially that amazing insight from the man from Gallup, extraordinary. Artificial intelligence moving into our lives, global trade moving east, climate change moving fast. It's a world of massive, fast change. And by the way, I timed the first mention of Donald Trump today at 3:52 this afternoon, which in a summit about global change and global challenge is very, very restrained of us and very welcome. So as we near the end of this Global Innovation Summit, it's time for what I might call that Olympic moment when the baton that has been held by this year's hosts, Queen's University Belfast, is passed to the next host, and that work is already getting underway for GIS2024. And I would say that rarely has any baton change, Olympic or otherwise, been done by two more eminent and distinguished women. So ladies and gentlemen, to join the GFCC President, Deborah Wynne-Smith, it is with great pleasure that I welcome to the stage the Chancellor of the University of Pittsburgh, Joan Gable, and our very own, the Chancellor of this Queen's University of Belfast, Hillary Rodham Clinton. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your patience. As with every great event, there's a plan A. And then, but as you may have heard from outside, I don't know whether any of you heard it, there were some protesters exercising that wonderful right that we all have in a free society, especially at this university and in any university, their right to free speech. I'm not sure whether this has anything to do with the delay. I'm just surmising that sometimes there's a plan A and then free speech can even get in the way of plan A. So I think I can certainly see some security personnel in the wings. And I think we are now ready. I'm getting a thumbs up, which is always a good sign. Double thumbs up. Ladies and gentlemen, could you do that again? Our guests, the Chancellor of the University of Pittsburgh, Joan Gable, and our very own Chancellor of Queen's University Belfast, Hillary Rodham Clinton.
Well, this is a wonderful surprise and honor to be joined by our Chancellor of Queen's University and illustrious Secretary of State and First Lady of the United States. So thank you so much for joining us. So we find ourselves coming to the end of 4 days of really inspiring conversation and dialogue and learning and exchanging. And I think some of us are a little tired, but we feel right now it's sort of like the end of the Olympics, and we're going to pass the torch for the next Global Innovation Summit. And I'm very excited to announce that the first meeting, as you know, of the GFCC, when it was launched, was in Washington, D.C. back in 2010. And now, 15 years later, we're going to bring the GFCC Annual Meeting and Innovation Summit to America. And the timing could not be better because we're living in a period of great technological change, economic progress. You all know what's going on all over the world. And we're proud that the United States stands at the heart of this transformation with a dynamic economy that continues to grow and generate jobs and fosters an environment for learning and groundbreaking innovation. But we also have places in our country, just like here. We've heard the stories of Belfast, of Manchester, their great role in the Industrial Revolution, coming back now as new centers of innovation. But we have that in the United States as well. And one of the cities that is truly a Renaissance, exciting city is Pittsburgh, again, known as the heart of our Industrial Revolution in the U.S. Andrew Carnegie, the steel that not only powered all the building in America, but enabled us to build our ships in World War II. And so it is really exciting that we will be bringing the GFCC to Pittsburgh next November in conjunction with the Council on Competitiveness National Conversation on Innovation that will take place in Pittsburgh. That's really now a center of mobility, of AI, of all the technological transformations, but also an incredibly vibrant, exciting, wonderful place to live. And so I want to introduce the Vice Chairman of the U.S. Council on Competitiveness for Academia, the very distinguished Chancellor of the University of Pittsburgh, Joan Gable. Recently, the President of University of Minnesota. She served as Provost of University of South Carolina. She is a tremendous leader, creator of the future, very much beloved by students and faculty. And Joan, the floor is yours, and thank you for bringing GFCC to Pittsburgh, PA.
Thank you, Deborah. I'm honored to join you and Chancellor Clinton and all of you here today. Queen's University is an incredible institution and has been a wonderful host this week. My thanks to Chancellor Clinton and Vice Chancellor Sir Ian Greer and the entire team here. This is my second time here. It only gets better with each visit. The entire GFCC team, Chad, Deborah, of course, and Roberto, you've made this an incredible event. You've set the bar very high. We are so proud at the University of Pittsburgh to have the opportunity to host the event next year in October of 2025, but we do so with recognition that Queen's University has done a tremendous job and that the baton pass will be quite a baton to pass. We hope you'll join us there. You'll find a really thriving institution, as Deborah described. The University of Pittsburgh is 237 years old, and there is a lot of tradition both at the institution and in the city. It dates back to really an outpost of civilization in the United States that began with literally a log cabin at an area of the city that we call the Point in what is now downtown Pittsburgh, where 3 rivers converge, at a tradition of toughness and resiliency, and now one of innovation, something that I think you all can relate to here, especially based on everything we've been hearing over the course of the last 3 days. Qualities that are really forged in our DNA in that part of the United States. Qualities that come to pass in a great fire that took the university all the way down in 1945 and left everything in ashes, but really rose again. And then we saw it go down again when the steel industry left the city of Pittsburgh and left the region really suffering. But now in great renaissance, where the universities have been at the epicenter of everything that has emerged. Pitt has evolved, which is what we call the university, and Pittsburgh, the city, has evolved into something really incredible, where we defeated a crippling disease. The polio vaccine was discovered at the University of Pittsburgh, and where we have scientists now literally restoring sight to the blind. I could go on the discoveries and innovations that are happening there. It's an innovation hub. We are in digital transformation, AI, cybersecurity, robotics, all merged with life sciences and biologics. And we have moonshots there, like bespoke biomanufacturing, all things that we can't wait to show you. Pitt is among America's top 20 most innovative universities, top research dollars, patent production, startups, all the kinds of things you've been describing, all the kinds of partnerships and collaborations that we've been talking about, a place where innovation meets entrepreneurship, a place where we want to talk about what it means to be a global innovation summit point. Everything that you've been sharing with us, we want to share with you. And I could go on and on. We're really thrilled to host you. The prettiest time of year in that part of the United States is October. It's the perfect time to be there. It's a beautiful place, and a lot of really fun, interesting things will be happening for you to see and experience. And with that, I have a short video to show you that I hope will intrigue you and make you want to come.
Part of the University of Pittsburgh is at the table of learning.
There's a lot you can say about this place. Gritty? Well, we prefer tough, resilient, innovative, of course. We're part of the city that built the backbone of America, and now we're making it bend and flex in every which way.
Your time at Pitt has also prepared you for what is possible.
But there's one thing you can't deny. When the world needs something, we find a way to give it to them. Whether that's defeating a crippling disease,
Salt's exhausting labors have paid off,
or fighting off the world's next life-threatening illness, we focus our eyes and attention on the ones who need us most, day in and far out.
So the question we have to deal with is, can we work and build together even when we're different?
All this comes naturally when you've built a foundation of community in a city that feels more like a family at a time when there's basically no other choice. So yeah, there's a lot you can say about this place. But this is what we know. We know that we've earned more than $1 billion in research funding just this year alone. We know that we're breaking ground for more groundbreaking innovation. We know that if you throw a problem our way, we'll do the work to solve it.
You are here, standing, greeted by the end of one journey and the beginning of the next.
We know that it's possible at Pitt.
Thank you, Joan. And I have to say, growing up in Akron, Ohio, one of our field trips was always to come to the Great Art Museum in Pittsburgh. So that has to be on your agenda too when you all join us. Well, I have to say, introducing Chancellor Clinton is a daunting task because her life of achievement and impact has really set the standard for, I think, most of the women and others in the world. So I will try to do my best in a few moments before you share your thoughts with us. But she has really inspired millions of women all over the world to reach for the stars and actually accomplish the impossible. Not mission possible, mission impossible, chap. But, you know, when you look at her career, starting at Wellesley College, you know, the president of her class, going on to Yale Law School, working in Congress as a lawyer, going out to Arkansas as the First Lady with her husband, then Governor Clinton, then becoming the first woman partner at the very illustrious Rose Law Firm, then coming to Washington as a First Lady who did important things, addressing issues around health care that needed so much reform, working with children. I mean, the list, she was a wonderful First Lady in her ceremonial roles, but she also did very important things that took our nation forward. And then, of course, being the first woman senator from New York and playing very important roles in her Senate leadership before being confirmed by the Senate in the administration of President Obama as Secretary of State. I had the opportunity, Secretary Clinton, to be on your International Economic Advisory Committee, and this was a group of both Republican and Democrats. It was very bipartisan, spanned administrations, and when you would come and join us, I mean, you were very busy traveling around the world, I think more than any Secretary of State doing important work. We all felt not only so privileged, but there was just uniform respect for you, your smart power strategy, and leading our country around the world. So I just wanted to share that with you, that I think of all the secretaries, we all loved coming to our meeting when we knew you were going to be there. I do have to say that being a graduate of Vassar College when it was still all women and you were at Wellesley, I could have gone to Wellesley, but I decided to go to Vassar. And had I gone to Wellesley, I would have probably voted for you as class president.
I cannot tell you how pleased I am to be here to really recognize the extraordinary work that this conference represents. Deb, to you and to your team and to all the sponsors, everyone who has been part of putting on the conference, but more than that, establishing this innovation theme over a number of years now. And as you just heard from Joan, you're in for a real treat if you are able to go next October to the University of Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh really is a city that has risen again. And I didn't know, Joan, until you said it in the video, showed it, how old the University of Pittsburgh is. 1787, that's extraordinary. I was somewhat stunned because, you know, our old universities we think of as Harvard, of course, of Columbia, you know, that go back to the Revolution and before. So it is truly a place of the past, the present, but mostly the future. And I think it's terrific that you'll be hosting this next year. You've heard so much over the course of the last few days about Belfast, another city that is quickly reinventing itself. And one of the main reasons, I would argue, is because of the end of conflict, which I was very, like so many of us, gratified to see. We had an extraordinary conference here 2 years ago, or a year and a half ago, to celebrate the Good Friday Agreement, the end of conflict, a moving away from the past to look toward the future, the very strong relationship that this university in particular, but others have with the business community, forging public-private partnerships, because there is no path for innovation unless you support higher education. And higher education has to be viewed as a public good, that businesses, governments, citizens understand, because it's through investments in higher education at world-class universities like this one here at Queen's, that the ideas are generated, that the people are trained and whose sights are lifted to think about how to make their mark in the future. And I want to underscore the role of higher education in innovation. There are some who I don't think understand the importance of the role that higher education has always played and is playing and will continue to play. So having this conference at a great university like Queen's, moving next year to another great university like Pitt, should underscore the importance of us continuing to invest in, to respect, to work with higher education. But it's also the people. What are the kinds of hopes and dreams of people in Northern Ireland, in Europe, in Asia, and of course the United States, and literally across the globe? How do you spark that innovation? I just came from looking at some of the projects that young entrepreneurs in schools here in Northern Ireland are doing. They're making a lot of recycled products, recycling denim for bags and other kinds of consumer products, using 3D printing. Young children, between the ages like 11 and 18 or 19, they're being given a chance to learn about the entrepreneurial opportunities, and that goes hand in hand with education, with skills acquisition, in order to create a competitive economy. And of course, government has to play its role. I personally am, very hopeful that the investments that are being made in the United States in advanced manufacturing through the CHIPS and Science Act, in infrastructure, modern 21st century infrastructure projects, advancing the role of health, finding creative and safe ways to use AI in innovation. All of that, you have to have government and business partnerships. You cannot expect to have the kind of results we're looking for without bringing together the public and the private sectors. So I just want to thank you, Deb, for you've been a champion of these concepts, of these ideas. When you and I worked together on a committee for the State Department looking at how the United States could help empower more creativity, innovation, partnerships, bringing the ideas, the best ideas from everywhere in the world together. That is what I see you doing. That's what I see this Competitive Council Consortium doing. That's what I see this conference doing. So it's an honor to be the Chancellor of Queen's. I was sworn in on this very stage right before COVID, which kind of interfered with being an active, present Chancellor, but I've tried to make up for it because it's an incredible honor to represent this university and to see the role that it's playing in promoting innovation in the economy in order to lift the sights and the opportunities and the prosperity of all the people. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Deborah, Joan, and Secretary Clinton. And I would echo those thoughts about Pittsburgh, a great American city, and actually very like Belfast. And of course, I also echo those thoughts about Secretary Clinton. I actually first met her in 1991, covering her husband Bill's election campaign, and then, of course, in the White House, and then her own campaign for the Democrat nomination, and of course, her own campaign for the presidency against that other guy. And, you know, it's funny that people in Westminster and Washington, in both the Department of State and the Foreign Office in Washington, in London, They will tell you which secretaries of state, which foreign secretaries they respected, and who was effective, who was liked by the staff, who was wonderful abroad. And I never heard a single bad thing about Secretary Clinton. I think she is still extraordinarily respected in Washington and by all those who worked with her. And quite frankly, yes, exactly. So we're very lucky to have her here. Quite frankly, I'm still pinching myself that she has agreed to become Chancellor of this university. What a wonderful honor and privilege for all of us. Now, before I invite our final group of speakers to the stage, I just want to take one short moment to thank and acknowledge the huge effort made by this university to bring this event together. Anyone who has been involved in any kind of large-scale event like this knows just how meticulous the planning is, and dealing with people from all over the world, some of them even with a security detail. So I think Queen's University has done a great job, and I'd like you to join me in showing our appreciation to everyone who has played a role in making these last few days possible. Please join me in a round of applause to this university. Thank you. Thank you for that. I'm sure it's appreciated by everyone, the people who are filming this, the people who are in charge of the audio, of the slides and everything else, and the sound guys over there, doing a great job. And finally, for our closing remarks, I would like to invite back to the stage Deborah Wynne-Smith, Professor Sirian Greer, Charles Holliday Jr., and Dr. Stephen Kingan.
So thank you again for joining us for the third and final day of the 2024 Global Innovation Summit here at Queen's. I should also express my deep gratitude to our speakers and our delegates for making this such a successful event with their outstanding contributions. And of course, thanks to all the staff here at Queen's who have made the summit such a wonderful success. I'd also like to thank our very special guest today, Queen's Chancellor, Secretary Hillary Rodham Clinton. We're truly grateful that she's been able to join us at today's event, and I should also thank her for all she does for the university. I do hope that the breadth and the depth of the conversations that we've had this week both empowered and engaged you, and that the networking opportunities have allowed you to meet new people and to hear new voices. I also hope that you've enjoyed your time here in Belfast at our university, and for me it's been a real privilege to host you as Vice-Chancellor in our university. Now, as some of you may already know, Queen's is celebrating its 180th year in 2025, with a programme of events throughout the year reflecting on our heritage and achievements, while looking to our future as a civic university committed to the communities that we serve as we shape a better world. The theme for our celebration next year is hope and history, a line taken from the poem by Queen's alumnus and Nobel laureate Seamus Heaney, The Cure at Troy. Before handing over to Chad Halliday, Chairman of the GFCC, to help close this event, I thought I would share a few words from that poem with you, because it resonates with the issues that we discussed at this summit. History says, don't hope on this side of the grave. But then, once in a lifetime, the longed-for tidal wave of justice can rise up, and hope and history rhyme. Thank you.
So Ian, that was wonderful. And this has been the standard for the future measurement of all our conferences. Joan, this is the standard we're going to be comparing you to. No pressure at all. But you got a nice boost from Secretary Clinton, so that should help. But really, on behalf of all the GFCC and everybody here, this has just been fantastic. And it's the warmth of the people that's made it fantastic. The facilities are unbelievable, but the warmth of the people is just really so critical in what we're doing. I reflect back on what Secretary Clinton just told us. She gave us a lot of very nice words, but what I think she did more than that is she had a positive, smiling attitude. Not complaining about what could have been, should have been, but here's the future, here's what we can do, and the fact she's giving back here. Joan, I think if you invite her to come to Pittsburgh, you might just get her. You know, so I really think that was an example we could all take away from this, is the kind of example we should be following as we go forward. The last thing I'd like to leave with you is you've been given fantastic ideas that you've learned from people on this stage, in the breakout groups, and just people you've met. Just take one of them and go do something with it and make a difference. Thank you very much. Stephen?
Good afternoon. As both the chair of the Centre for Competitiveness for Northern Ireland and a Pro-Chancellor at the university here, I'm thrilled to be standing in front of you on the last day of what has been a truly exceptional Global Innovation Summit. Over the course of the past week, we have heard from a myriad of experts and high-profile speakers from all over the world about far-ranging issues, exploring innovation as a key to sustainability, inclusiveness as it must be for long-term sustainability, and with today's discussion focused on the power of partnership. Much can be said about the speakers, all of whom have provided unique insights into their field of expertise. But I want to express my gratitude to you all, the delegates, for your contribution to the discussions over the last 3 days. You've been engaging and engaged. You've listened and taken in the information, shared your expertise and opinions in workshops, delivered new perspectives and approaches to the issues being discussed. Much of this summit and the conversations taking place have been focused on the future and how we as a global society can progress, and it's been refreshing to hear from a diverse range of voices hailing from all corners of the world. Northern Ireland, of course, is my home, and improving the efficiency and quality of businesses here has been a lifelong passion for myself. In the early years of the turn of the millennium, I came together with like-minded businessmen to take on board the policies and approach of the European Federation of Quality Management, and successfully implemented these to drive the efficiency of businesses here. It wasn't long before our like-minded group decided to take a broader look at improving overall productivity in Northern Ireland. This is when we found our linkage with the US Council on Competitiveness and developed a relationship to the benefit of the business communities on both sides of the Atlantic through collaboration and knowledge sharing. In 2010, the Global Federation of Competitiveness Councils, or GFCC, was formed. Myself and other Northern Ireland business people were founding members, and we continue to work closely with the GFCC to this day to ensure that businesses here in Northern Ireland are supported to improve through quality excellence, breakthrough innovation, and increased productivity. As many of you in this room will know, Deborah Wynne-Smith plays a huge role as part of that linkage, particularly here at the university, where she sits on the International Advisory Board for the Queen's Business School, while also chairing both the US Council for Competitiveness and indeed the GFCC. The close relationship between businesses here and the US Council and GFCC have put Northern Ireland on the map in terms of innovation and productivity. And Queen's host this summit has put us at the heart of some really important conversations, helping to cement Queen's and indeed Northern Ireland's position on the global stage. I think we can all agree that the 2024 Global Innovation Summit has been a real success. It has put a spotlight on the thought leadership and expertise that exists both here in Northern Ireland and the other corners of the globe. It has showcased the leaders making a real difference to the lives of millions, and that is everyone in this room. Deborah, Chad, and to the whole GFCC team, and to Surain and the Queen's family, thank you for putting on such a fantastic summit. I can only imagine the amount of time went into the careful planning and the work that has gone into bringing it to fruition. What a feat, and it's been truly spectacular. It's been fantastic to host you all here in Belfast. I hope you have really enjoyed your time here, and don't be a stranger. We'd love to welcome you back many times again. Thank you.
Well, let me just, on behalf of everyone here that's been with us over these days, thank our incredible hosts and partners, Queen University, Professor Sir Ian Greer, and the Center for Competitiveness, Dr. Stephen King. And it has been really, as Chad, our chairman of the GIFCC, said, the best ever, and has set the standard for what we want to do going forward. So thank you, and your incredible teams. They work very tirelessly, and I want to thank very much Ryan Feeney. I want to thank Paul Madden. I want to thank Roberto Alvarez. They've all worked so hard, and many, many others. But thank you all for coming. Some of you traveled from very far places all around the globe to be with us, and I know that you will be with us tomorrow for these site visits, but then returning home. And I want to also just conclude by saying we founded the GFCC 15 years ago, but our work on the competitiveness agenda with Ireland started 20 years ago. And in human history, 20 years is seen as a generation. And so in 20 years, we've accomplished a lot together. The next 20 years are going to be more important than ever. And as Margaret Mead, the famous anthropologist, said, don't ever underestimate the power of one individual, but working with others to change the world. And that's what the GFCC is all about, to make a better world for all our nations and all our citizens and generations to come. Thank you so much. And this concludes the 2024 Global Innovation Summit at Queen's University.
Deborah, Ian, Charles, Stephen, thank you very much indeed. And yes, that is it. That concludes this Global Innovation Summit. 3 terrific days. I hope you have felt the power of partnership over these 3 days. Maybe you've made some new partners. I hope you've had a lot of fun. Thank you all for coming. It's been a real pleasure to host you here today. The last time I was on this stage was my own graduation, so that was just a year or 2 ago. Thank you very much. I wish you a safe journey home. Thank you.